He said he had no family. That line erased me in a single breath, signed on paper, broadcast on the news, and carried by strangers like it was the truth. 40 years after my son left for work and never came back, I watched him on TV under another name, denying the mother who kept a light burning and the father who wore the search into his bones. This isn't a story about grief learning to be quiet. It's about dragging a lie into the open, forcing the record to say our names out loud, and choosing repair over revenge, no matter how deep the cut. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs you, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp and your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments hit home. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I was Jacob Rivers long before my hair went silver and my knuckles turned into a row of hammered knots. In 1985, River Rouge smelled of damp steel and fryer grease at dawn, and the stamping plants breathed a slow fog that settled along the river. My alarm rarely beat the radio. The sports guy's gravel voice nudged me up at 4:30, and the kettle rattled while I checked the sky through the screen door. Cold air came in like a hand across my face. The kitchen was simple. 2 chipped enamel mugs, a scarred wood table, a fridge with a door that shut like an old book. A family photo from Belle Isle stood crooked by the bread box, the 3 of us squinting into lake light. Loretta's scarf flaring red, Andre's shirt tugged by wind, my hand on his shoulder like a promise I meant to keep forever. I kept to the rituals that keep a life from sliding. Coffee measured by eye, thermos warmed with sink water, boots lined heel to toe. The city cleared its throat, diesel on Fort Street, a far train, the first bus sighing to a stop. If you stand quiet, Detroit turns soft right before dawn. That hour forgives dense and hard talk and makes a man believe he can square a day with his hands. Andre came in with the half-shy, half-ready look he wore since he made day shift at Stamping 3. 22, tall in a way that made his jacket seem smaller, moving like a man who knows a day will take if you don't lean first. He passed me the tin of grounds like a relay baton and reached for his lunch pail. Loretta tied her red headscarf and rested a palm on his back the way nurses do when they center a patient. Outside the window, her chrysanthemums climbed the chain-link fence, cups of color in the gray. She touched his cheek with 2 fingers and said the thing her mother had said to her, "Carry your peace." He nodded because he understood blessings don't always dress as prayers. I wasn't a school teacher, but I taught my boy what machines confess if you listen where they live. Bearings don't lie, belts tell on themselves. Put your ear near the housing, not on it, close enough to hear the note thin when the load shifts. Read the blueprint like a prayer and the floor like weather. He took to that quick. He was better than me at not letting anger write checks our name couldn't cash. When men flicked ash words at us, he kept a door open with silence long enough for kindness to step through, and half the time it did. That was a lesson I learned from my son and pretended I'd always known. He had a plan straight as chalk on new concrete. He wanted mechanical school. Tuition doesn't pay itself, so he'd been sniffing for extra hours at the old gas station by the bridge. I trusted plans you can hold, a lunch pail, a thermos, a pay stub with your name spelled right. Loretta trusted smaller things that turned big over time. A clean sink, a neat bed, a prayer breathed into morning before the day could argue back. Between the 3 of us, the house stayed upright, even when the city leaned. The kitchen bulb threw honey yellow while the window kept the gray of almost morning. Andre set the pail on the table, kissed his mother's cheek, and swung the keys once like a bell. I checked the street without meaning to. "Drive slow," I said. "Roads are wet." He shrugged into his jacket. "Yes, sir." Loretta's voice was steam soft. "Be safe." Andre smiled. The good kind, the kind you can live on for hours. I'll be back by dinner. We'd said those lines enough to braid them into rope. They held because we did. The gate sang its tired squeal when he pushed it, a sound you feel in your fillings. Dew pricked the grass. The sidewalk glittered as if dusted with ground glass. The Nova sat nose out, blue as a bruise. He slid behind the wheel and the engine rolled over, gravelly at first, then finding the note I knew. You can tell a shift by sound, the tightening, the brief slack, the clutch clearing its throat. He pulled onto Fort Street, past the corner store, past the dark barber window, where his photo with the lopsided afro waited for Saturday light. Red taillights winked at the intersection and slid into the soft belly of morning. Inside, the clock took small bites of time. I rinsed the mugs, wiped the table, chased the black freckles of coffee grounds that always got away. Loretta parted the curtain with 2 fingers and watched the fence as if flowers could report on the day. She hummed the low part of a hymn and set a loaf to rise. Our house made sense in soft tasks. Even the refrigerator had a rhythm that matched the clock if you stood close enough. I touched the Belle Isle photo with a knuckle. "You'll make it," I had told him the day we took it. He'd said, "I will." We didn't overspend words. We put them where they could do work and let them rest when they were done. Men say routine is a cage. Some days it's a bridge. Work, eat, sleep, save. 4 stakes that held up the tent of our living. Pull one and the canvas sags. I believed in straight lines then. Start a thing, finish it, tuck the tools in the red box, wipe the fingerprints. That faith is what I handed my son, not sermons, not lectures, the honest weight of a socket wrench, the mercy of a clean rag, the quiet rule that you do not let a day go hungry for your best work. I stepped onto the porch and leaned on the rail, letting the chill soak my sleeves. "Drive like the road is watching," I called, even though he was 2 turns away and couldn't hear me. Loretta stood beside me, hands clasped below her ribs the way nurses hold themselves between shifts. "He'll be fine," she said. "He always is." I believed her because belief is part of the job. The street gathered the sound and thinned it to a thread only I pretended to hold. Morning peeled itself open. I locked the door, checked the stove, pocketed Loretta's list. The radio murmured box scores. The announcer laughed at a joke I missed. I thought the day was a straight rail and we were the car that knew where it was going. The last thing I heard of my boy that morning was the engine smoothing as he found third. Dinner waited for a boy who did not come. Loretta slid a plate into the oven and turned the dial low, as if heat could keep time from stiffening. Honey light pooled across the scarred table, over 2 chipped mugs inverted on a towel, over the square of linoleum where Andre's boots usually left a wet crescent. The wall clock spoke its patient syllables while the refrigerator hummed in reply. I lifted my fork, set it down, and listened with her to the house counting. At 9, I walked the porch and scanned Fort Street. Headlights stitched the dark, lacing wet asphalt with thread-thin reflections. "Maybe he picked up that extra shift," Loretta murmured, keeping her voice small so it would not spook hope. "He'll call." I nodded because agreement is a softer blanket than doubt. By 10, the oven window shone like a small moon. I shut it, pocketed my keys, and told Loretta I'd be back before midnight. The route wrote itself in muscle memory. I idled past the plant fence and watched the stamping halls brood under sodium lamps, those tall boxes of noise now gone quiet. I swung by the old gas station near the bridge and asked the nightman if he'd seen a blue Nova, a tall kid with a lunch pail and a quick nod. He shook his head and turned back to his paperwork. Near Zug Island, diesel and river mud braided their smells, wind carried a metallic cold straight to the teeth. Every shoulder where a car might have limped was empty, every pull-off slick with rain and wrappers and no story we could use. Near midnight, I looped home. The porch light had been tilted toward the yard like Loretta thought it could lean farther if she asked just right. She had a hand on the curtain. "Anything?" I said, though her shoulders already told me. "No," she said. The clock kept counting. I sat until 2, rose, and the chair legs barked on the floor like a reprimand. I told her I'd go again. The city pulled its coat tight. By dawn, the wipers had traced the same arc so many times the glass felt engraved by worry. Morning brought its kiosk phrases. At the precinct desk, a man with a neat mustache and a tired tie said, "Adults sometimes take off for a few days. Give it time." I stood very straight so my voice would not crack. He doesn't take off. He clocks out and comes home. The man tapped a form. "Write the details," he said. Forms make a problem look obedient. I filled the blanks like a student afraid a wrong answer might doom the exam, listing height and scars and the exact blue of his car the way a painter mixes a color he will never see again. At the plant gate, the shift supervisor checked a ledger. "Clocked out on time," he said. "No incident." He handed back a nothing that weighed like a brick. I walked the lot anyway, looking for oil freckles, for fresh gravel tugged by a turning tire, for the polite dark drip where a radiator bid the night goodbye. The asphalt returned rain and reflections. I pressed my palm to the hood of every blue car as if one might still be warm and honest. By week's end, they dragged the Detroit River. Men in slick coats stared down as the crane unstitched black water. Tires came up like rotten fruit. Chains, rusted pipe, a dented drum with no markings, nothing with a name. The river closed its lips as if embarrassed by what we asked it to hold, as if it knew the difference between evidence and junk and preferred not to argue. We printed flyers at the corner copy shop until the paper curled from the machine's heat. The barber let me tape a sheet over the mirror where Andre had once watched his lopsided afro and laughed. The laundromat door rattled when I opened it. The flyers went beside the soap prices and the lost cat notice. At the bus shelter, wet wind tried to peel the corners back. I smoothed them with my palm and watched the ink bleed. Andre's eyes ran first, then the chin. Faces are not designed for weather. They soften until even a father has to squint to keep a son in view. The porch light became Loretta's stubborn star. "So the boy can find his way home," she said, and clicked it on at dusk. She kept it burning every night, summer heat or lake winter, until the year her lungs quit and her hands folded for good. People say a light brings angels. I think sometimes it only brings moths, but it gives a house a spine. Neighbors learned to measure our nights by that cone of yellow, by the way it cut a small, exact circle out of the dark and dared morning to find us. The phone did its part for a while. Officers called to say they were canvassing, that they had no updates, that they would follow up. Friends called to ask what we needed and then to say they were praying. Calls thin like hair, visits thin like patience. Soon the phone mostly rehearsed a dial tone as perfect as snow, and we practiced answering silence with smaller words so we would not spin the big ones too soon. I put Andre's leather keychain in my pocket so the weight would argue with vanishing. I started a small notebook with a clean first page: date, time, place, who I spoke to, what they did not say. Notes make a railing when the stairs are dark. I retied the porch light's pull chain so it would hang lower, as if that would bring the glow closer to the ground he knew. I learned the pitch of waiting the way I once learned the pitch of bearings about to fail. A hum not loud but inescapable, a song of parts turning without progress. When Loretta slept, I sat in the kitchen and rehearsed the route in my head: plant, bridge, island, gas station, home, like a prayer with 4 beads and a frayed string. I pictured each traffic light lifting its little red hand and setting it down again. I pictured Andre's cassette in the glove box, his thumb on the wheel at 10 and 2, his shoulders loose with the certainty of coming back. I pictured him walking in and saying he was sorry, that the car broke down in a pocket of the city no map bothered to learn. The clock said otherwise. The house agreed. Even the porch light, stubborn star that it was, could not pull a road closer. It could only shine and wait, which is what we did and what we would keep doing, until waiting became the only work we knew how to do. The marina's small TV sat on a wire shelf beside the first aid kit. Its screen gaped like a small window into places I didn't owe rent to. I kept it on low during the early shift to keep the booth from feeling like a chapel for an old man and his thermos. That morning, the crawl at the bottom of the news rolled past stock numbers and weather fronts and then snagged on a phrase I did not know my body still feared. Security executive charged in identity fraud, Savannah Federal Courthouse, Halberd Dynamics. The anchor's voice pulled the word fraud so flat it sounded like paper. I reached for the remote without meaning to. The footage was the kind you could film any day on any courthouse steps. Agents in suits, a knot of cameras, a man moving between them like a needle through cloth. But the face the lens caught was not any day. Gray hair cut close. Jaw I knew the slope of. Eyes narrowed the way a man narrows them when he refuses to let the room take his measure. He kept his mouth in the tight line he used at 22 when his temper wanted to be taller than his judgment. I touched the glass the way you touch a window to test whether it is really closed. A caption tucked itself under the picture like a tidy lie. Ethan Cole, Chief of Security Operations, Halberd Dynamics. The anchor said the other parts with that careful rhythm we give to sealed facts. Multiple documents. Long-term assumption of another identity. Born in Michigan, no next of kin. The last clause moved through me like a mailed letter that knows your name and refuses it anyway. My thumb found the groove in my thermos where the paint has worn to metal. I set the cup down because my hand did not trust itself. Call if you have information, the screen offered. The hotline number sat in the corner like a dare. I wrote it down, dialed. A woman with a desk voice answered and asked me to state my tip clearly. I said my name and then I said my son's, the one I taught to diagnose a bearing by listening with his skull bone near the housing. I told her the man on the screen had my son's face, only older, harder from years I didn't get to see. She asked if I had documents. I sent a scan of his birth certificate. I sent the photo from Belle Isle where the lake wind made Loretta's scarf loud, and I curled my fingers over Andre's shoulder as if my hand were a signature you could notarize. While the progress bar inched, my heart counted seconds like a man on a line counting strokes. An email bounced back with a case number and a sentence that seemed polite when typed. Thanks, sir. Investigators will review. I called the field office listed in the crawl. The man there told me he could not confirm identities or share the status of any individual. Ongoing security inquiry, he said, and I heard the lid of a box click shut with both of us inside it. He was born in Michigan, I said. He has next of kin. The man did not argue. He let the silence do it for him. Outside, the rigging kept clattering. The water kept lifting itself up and setting itself down, but the day had lost a tooth and my tongue could not stop going to the gap. No next of kin. It told me more than the thing it claimed to tell. It told me he had said we did not exist. It told me he had signed some form somewhere that canceled the sound of my name in his mouth. I put the cup down again because I had picked it up without thinking. The booth light made a shallow puddle on the counter. In it, I could see my fingers and the tremor I had learned to ignore. There is a point at which grief, tired of its own weight, puts on work clothes. I pulled the tin box out from under the cot, set it on the counter, and opened it. The photo was still a little sticky where old tape had been. The key lay cold and indifferent. I took out the small notebook I had carried through the first 10 years after Andre vanished and then abandoned because you cannot write forever without answers. On the next clean page, I printed, Ethan Cole equals Andre. I dated it, underlined it twice. A man needs a ledger, even if the numbers are the kind you feel more than some. The TV moved on to weather. I lowered the volume and closed my eyes long enough to steady the river in my ears. When I opened them, an email waited in my inbox without a sender name I recognized. The subject line was nothing. 3 dots, like someone who had run out of words and left the door ajar. I clicked. A video attached, file name that looked auto-made. The image bloomed with the jaundiced wash of tape. A time code ticked in the corner as if the camera had a pulse. The angle was high, the way a parking lot camera looks down on the world without love. Rain misted across the frame in a static that made the night look granular. A young man stepped into view with a lunch pail slung from his fingers, shoulders forward, a shade like he was leaning into tomorrow. The white van idled just at the edge of the light. No license plate. The side door slid open with a utility sound. Another figure waited by the door, cap pulled low. The cap carried a union logo I knew from 100 meetings, but the kerning was wrong and the crest sat too fat, like a forgery done by a man who has only seen the real thing in passing. I watched the young man I loved walk into the van's mouth. He did not look back. The door stitched, the night closed. The van rolled a foot and paused, as if waiting for permission, then flowed out of frame. Nobody exited the main gate in that clip, nobody signed a ledger. The camera held the look of the empty lot longer than it needed to, like even the machine understood that the emptiness was the point. I watched it twice, 3 times, until the booth's fluorescent hum felt like a rope pulled tight against my ear. My hand found the leather keychain in my pocket and squeezed. A hot, clean line of purpose cut through the fog of the years like a torch through painter's cloth. If there had been a net, it had threads. Threads can be traced. I wrote the time code down, wrote the logo's wrongness, wrote the phrase "no next of kin" and put a line through it so I could start breathing. I did not know yet where I would go first. Halberd, the FOIA forms, the old names in my Detroit phone book. But the work had come back to me. Grief had punched its time card. The day had turned. The day after the news, I chose procedures over prayers. Grief can kneel, work must stand. I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn since a cousin's funeral and set out for Halberd Dynamics, a glass box that pretended to be harmless by being see-through. The lobby smelled like filtered air and new carpet. Security gates glowed a patient green, badges flashed at chests, as if the people wearing them belonged more to the building than to themselves. I stepped to the desk and placed both hands on the counter so they wouldn't shake. "Do you have an appointment?" the guard asked, kind and rehearsed. "No," I said, "only a name." He smiled the way a door smiles when it's locked. "Policy, sir." Behind him, a scanner chirped in even beats, a metronome for refusals. I wrote my number on a slip and left it as if paper could finish what a man could not start. Back at the marina, I drafted my FOIA requests. The form boxes felt like small rooms with no windows. Subject: usage of identity documents connected to Ethan Cole, dates covering 3 decades, agencies unnamed because men like that serve many masters. I attached my case number from the hotline, footnoted public broadcasts, added public interest. I printed, signed, scanned, and sent. The auto reply arrived faster than a breath. "Your request has been received." A week later, another email spoke in the clean grammar of walls. Withheld pursuant to exemptions related to national security and ongoing enforcement. Bureaucracy is a solvent. It can thin anything until the truth runs off the page. I needed voices that still knew the plant. Detroit remembers in the mouths of the men who work there. I flew up on a discounted fare and found the Retirees Club in a strip mall that had outlived its anchor store. Fluorescents hummed. Old Union pins winked on a corkboard. We told time by surgeries and championships. Calvin Boone rose slow and hugged me once, the kind of handshake that says a man is still accounted for. We sat with styrofoam coffee and the sound of traffic like a river that lost its name. "They came around back then," Calvin said, drawing a little circle on the table with his cup, "talking clean records, new names, better money. Not union, not company. Something in between." He remembered Andre calling out a supervisor on safety and then saying in a voice that had no place to put itself, "Out of here is the only way I become somebody." The line landed in me like a tool I'd left under a car and only now found with my foot. I slept in a cheap room near the old neighborhood. In the morning, I rented a storage unit key I hadn't turned in and walked a corridor where lights woke in squares ahead of me. Boxes weighted with that patient look cardboard wears. Tape lifted in papery size. I found the cap by smell before I saw it. Sweat, dust, a ghost of machine oil. The brim held the shape of his thumb and forefinger from 100 adjustments. I lifted it with both hands and set it in a new bag, then a second, then a hard shell case I labeled in block letters. Chain of custody is a church for men like me. When you can't touch the past, you can at least touch the rules. At a shipping counter, the clerk asked, "Anything fragile?" I said, "Only what time couldn't break." The scanner beeped, the receipt spooled, and a small piece of my house left me. I called Naomi Gray from the curb. She answered on the second ring, breathless with the sound of stairs. "Bring me something the lab can swear on," she had told me. "It's on its way," I said. She went quiet in the good way. "Then I'm with you," she said. "But we do this right, no shortcuts. They'll use any loose thread to pull the whole story apart." I made a second stop at a drugstore and bought a consumer DNA kit like a man buys salt. Back in the room, I read the pamphlet twice and followed the instructions with a care that made me laugh at myself for a second. I mailed my spit off to be measured against a country of strangers. 2 weeks later, the app pinged, a masked cousin-level match somewhere in Georgia. The map did not light up a name, only a shape. Even so, I felt the floor tilt a fraction toward the coast. I wrote a letter by hand to the attorney listed for Ethan Cole. I kept it short so he could finish it in the space between 2 appointments. 5 minutes in a hallway. No cameras, no demands. A father wants to see his son's eyes in a room where no one asks either of them to lie. I signed it with a pen that had been my father's and put 2 stamps on the envelope as if more postage could make a message heavier and harder to ignore. Weeks passed. The letter did what letters do best in this century. It disappeared without leaving a stain. To pay for lab work and a legal retainer that wouldn't laugh me out of the office, I sold my skiff. The hull had learned my balance. Resin and river had made a smell between them that meant Saturday to me even on a Tuesday. The buyer counted bills slow and honest. I ran a palm along the gunnel once, the way you do across a dog's head when you've decided to be brave. Some trades are clean, you exchange what takes you out for what might bring you back. Back in Charleston, the marina lights stacked their reflections like coins. I set the leather keychain on the booth counter and let its weight say the thing my mouth couldn't shape. I opened the notebook and logged the week. Halberd, no entry. FOIA, exemptions. Calvin, recruiters and the sentence about becoming somebody. Artifact, secured. Lab, tracking ID, DNA, Georgia ping, counsel, no reply. Boat, sold. The list looked like a ladder. I would climb it even if it leaned against the wrong wall. A man can love his son and still understand that love alone won't boss a system. It needs receipts, seals, dates, and the slow courage to persist past the polite no. When the day ended, I locked the booth and stood by the water until the dock creaked under my shoes. The tide kept its appointment the way good machines do. I thought of the cap moving across sorting tables, of a technician bent to her task, of a barcode debating with blood. Years of chasing shadows had finished their shift. Grief punched in at a different station, put on work clothes, and began. The call came just after dawn, when the marina still held its breath and the gulls hadn't yet started their arguments. I recognized the lab's number from the tracking emails I'd memorized like psalms. I braced the phone between shoulder and jaw and set my palm flat on the counter to keep it from shaking. The voice on the other end sounded like fluorescent light, precise, cool, without room for wishful hearing. Mr. Rivers, preliminary probability 99.97, consistent with a paternal relationship between you and the contributor of the cap sample. I let the numbers land, felt each decimal point like a rivet setting. "I hear you," I said, because anything more would waste both our time. She reminded me it was preliminary pending a confirmatory assay. I thanked her and ended the call, then stood still with my hand on the leather keychain as if it were a heart that needed covering. Naomi texted 2 words, "Call me." And 30 minutes later, I sat in her rented studio, a room the size of a walk-in closet, padded with foam like a careful lie. The red light blinked REC, and she checked my headset, the plastic arms squeezing the tender back of my jaw. "Your voice is the evidence," she said. "Then I'll spend it," I told her. We built the episode like a mechanic lays out tools: photo, flyer, timeline, the clip of the white van with the wrong Union crest, the lab's probability readout, all lined up to catch light. I spoke slow and dry, like a man reading gauges on a long climb. I told the story of the last morning, the squeal of the gate, the Nova's second to third, the promise to be home by dinner. And then I told the story of the news crawl that said no next of kin, how those words put their thumb on my throat. We kept the music spare. When she asked off mic if I wanted to record a message directly to the man now called Ethan, I shook my head. "I'm not praying to a radio," I said. "I'm filing a claim." By nightfall, the episode moved like it had its own legs. People clipped the part about the porch light and set it to their own memories. They posted the old flyer to timelines where the rain could not blur it. A segment producer from a local station emailed Naomi. My voicemail filled with voices from men I hadn't seen since the line ran 3 shifts and the cafeteria coffee could etch a spoon. The heat of attention wasn't relief. It was a hand on my back pushing me up the next stair. Halbert answered before the day ended, the way companies answer when they've spent money learning to sound steady. Naomi read me the pull quote over her screen. "At this time, there is no verified familial relation." Halbert Dynamics supports due process and the privacy of all involved parties. The grammar ironed its pants before it left the house. I recognized the rhythm from a lifetime of announcements that meant yes but not here, or no but not now. I wrote the sentence into my notebook and underlined the phrase "at this time." Time was exactly what we were putting pressure on. My attorney, cheap retainer, Razormine, met me on the county courthouse steps the next morning with a folder that had my name spelled right in blue pen. "We're asking for a declaratory judgment," she said, tapping the top page. "Identity recognized as Andre Rivers and a compelled public correction of the no next of kin narrative." The filing office smelled like paper grit and old ink. The clerk wore a cardigan that seemed to have outlasted 3 administrations. She took my ID, slid the forms under a stamp, and brought it down with a thud I felt through my wrist. "File number she read, and I repeated the digits back to her until they found a seat in my head and sat down. The first hearing landed fast, a scheduling thing more than substance, but the room still drew breath when he walked in. Gray hair cut close, suit that knew its alphabet, the same mouth line I'd scolded him for as a boy when he used it to hide a laugh he shouldn't have. He did not look at me, which felt more honest than a quick glance would have. The judge, a woman who seemed allergic to grandstanding, looked over the tops of her glasses at both tables. "Keep this room and the public orderly," she said. She did not say gag order, but the warning hung in the air like a sign you don't need to read twice. Outside, cameras made their zipper sounds. My attorney steered me around the knot. Naomi waited at the curb and opened her laptop like a priest lifting a book. "Look," she said, and there it was. A payroll screenshot from an internal source. A line item that appeared every pay period. Anonymity, hazard allowance. She circled it with the cursor. "That's private intel infrastructure language," she said. "You pay a man to have fewer attachments. You reward the erasure." The number beside the line was not small. I felt a slow anger reach for a chair inside me and sit down. That night in my room, with the mini fridge ticking like a cheap metronome, Naomi called with a voice altered to a low synthetic timbre. She had a whistleblower on the other line. We 3 spoke in a triangle of caution. The modulated voice described a clause I had never heard named, though I had lived under its weather for 40 years. Non-existence. A clean page demanded of certain hires, declare no living family to reduce targeting risk, sign to certify the risk is yours alone, live the fiction as far as it needs to go. He would have been required to say it, the voice concluded. Required. I wrote the word down because it wanted to slide off the desk. Paper shackle, I added, and the words looked right together, light but strong, made to hold. I thought of Loretta's porch light burning in rooms of strangers and of Andre standing on some contractor's trailer signing a line that punished both of us differently. The old anger flickered, then changed color. I don't want him in a cage, I told Naomi. I want our names said where the lie was said. I want that clause dragged into daylight and measured. She was quiet long enough that I heard her fingers stop on the keys. Then that's the frame, she said. Identity, correction, policy. The next morning I went back to the courthouse to watch lawyers argue about calendars as if time were a hallway they owned. When the judge asked the room if there were any additional motions, my attorney rose to flag our intent to challenge any employment terms requiring blanket familial erasure as against public policy. The other side wrote notes very quickly without looking up. I bent over my notebook and set 2 lines low on the page where only I would see them later. He said we were gone. Paper made him say it. Still say our names. I closed the book and put my hand on it the way a mechanic sets a palm on the hood after he tightens the last bolt. The engine wasn't fixed, but it was running in the right direction. Out in the corridor, the building's air tasted like filtered water and old dust. I took a breath that went all the way down and came back carrying something I had not felt since the day I taught my son how to hear a bearing. The clean, plain sense that work, patient, documented, repeatable, can move the heavy thing. Night pressed the marina into a hush that made small sounds honest. I cleared the booth counter and set the leather keychain in the center like a compass I could touch. The lab's decimals, the courthouse stamp, the whistleblower's claws, they orbited there, clicking into the same dark sky. I turned on the desk lamp and let its cone of light earn its keep. It wasn't a porch, but the bulb threw that same stubborn yellow I'd watched Loretta click on for 10 years. Waiting used to be our ritual. Tonight, the light meant witnessing. My lawyer's email arrived with the gravity of a lid lowering. Attached, a draft settlement. The paper stock was thick enough to simulate sincerity. The language, clean enough to rinse a conscience. Donation routed to a neutral community fund. No admission. Confidentiality. Non-disparagement. All parties agree to refrain from on-record statements concerning familial relationships. I read it twice, then once more aloud without moving my lips. The draft smelled faintly of cologne and inevitability. I printed it and folded it into thirds so the creases would tell me where it wanted to break. I turned the notebook to a fresh page and wrote terms at the top in letters just shy of impatient. Under it, I set down the non-negotiables, each on its own line, each in the kind of block print you use when you don't want a judge to misread you. Declaratory identity. Court affirms Ethan Cole is Andre Rivers on the record. Public correction, verbal, microphone on of the phrase, no next of kin with Loretta Rivers spoken by name. Policy. Review and void any employment terms requiring blanket familial erasure. I underlined the last word until the paper almost failed. Erasure is a quieter word for the same old work. The phone lit with my lawyer's number. There is an offer, she said, voice-trained level. Sizable donation, no admission, strict confidentiality. You drop personal claims, I let the desk lamp find the shine in the keychain's worn edge. Terms, I asked, because a man should make his words pay rent. She read the list I already knew and told me we could do real good quietly. I measured the quiet she meant against the noise that had been required to erase us. The wrong was loud, I said. The repair needs a microphone. The marina lifted and set itself down in the tide's patient grammar. I poured coffee that had earned the right to be called old. On the notebook's left margin, I copied the stamped file number and spoke it under my breath until each digit took a seat and stopped fidgeting. I drafted a small statement in case the judge asked me to speak. Not an argument, not a speech, just a frame, built square and plumb. I wrote Loretta's name 3 times to steady my hand, felt how saying it out loud changed the air even in an empty room. Names are tools. You lay them on the bench where you can reach them without looking. Near midnight, Naomi texted from a number I saved as NG, 2 letters that had learned to carry more weight than their size. "Hold the line," I read, and thumbed back, "On the record." She replied with a dot, then another, as if typing could mimic breathing. We agreed she'd keep the episode quiet until after the hearing. Oxygen belongs to the room where the oath lives. Sleep came like a worker you don't supervise. Late, efficient, unchatty. Before dawn, I dressed the way you dress for a long drive, layers that forgive air conditioning and nerves. The keychain went in my pocket where it could argue with my thigh if I wandered. Outside, shrimp boats shouldered out against the bay's dark mouth. I said Loretta's name once into the wind and watched it fold itself into the tide. Courthouses have a smell like polished wood reconsidering its treehood. The corridor's air was cool enough to make the skin notice its job. My attorney walked me through what would happen the way a foreman walks a rookie through a dangerous station. Where to stand, where not to look if provoked, how to save our breath for the bench. Before we reached the courtroom, a man in a silk tie intercepted us with the careful courtesy of a waiter bearing a hot plate. "We can do good quietly," he said, and angled the settlement draft as if light would sweeten it. "The wrong was loud," I repeated, steady enough to hear my father's lag-bolt in the sentence. His eyebrows climbed a notch, then returned to their posts. Inside, varnish held the ceiling's light the way a lake holds sky, imperfect and earnest. Opposing counsel shuffled copies into the neat stacks that say we have all the paper and thus all the power. Ethan took a seat without looking around. The posture was familiar. Shoulders squared to the job, chin set to keep the jaw from telling on the inside of a man. I faced forward and thought about the rule I taught him. Don't stare at the problem, watch the tool. The judge entered with the unshowy authority of someone who can hang a frame straight without talking about it. We rose, we sat, the calendar got argued, like time was a hallway and they owned the doors. Then she turned to me. "Mr. Rivers, what exactly are you pursuing here?" The room went spare as a shop at closing. I felt the keychain find the bone of my thigh, a small, rightful pain. "I'm not here to put anyone in a cage," I said, and let the sentence find its level. "I'm here for existence, for the court to say my son's name, and for a public correction of the lie that my family did not exist." The words crossed the space between us without apology and took a place on the record where weather can't reach them. The judge held my eyes long enough to measure my square. She nodded once, the way a builder nods at a trueness she can use. Counsel conferred in the quick, wordless way of men who grew fluent in margins. My attorney summarized our terms for the microphone, ticking each line as if she were checking torque. The other side asked for time. The judge granted it and reminded the room we were borrowing a house older than any of us. I sat back and felt the day discover its weight without tipping me. Hush money would have closed the file. I wanted a door, not a lid. When we filed out, the corridor held the same cold air, the same shoes on stone, but my breath met it differently. The lamp in the marina had been for waiting. This morning's light, that precise, unsentimental fluorescence, was for work. On the steps, I opened the notebook and wrote in the low corner where only I tend to read. Names first, then policy, then rest. I slipped the keychain back into my pocket. The metal ring clicked against my nail with a sound you can trust. The email arrived with the plain chime that doesn't know it bears a verdict. I printed it because thick letterhead steadies a thing. The words were clinical and kind in the way of good instruments. Confirmatory probability approaches certainty for a paternal relationship between Jacob Rivers and the contributor. I set the page on the counter and smoothed the curl from one corner. Relief didn't lift me. It settled me the way a heavy tool finds the bench and stops vibrating. I whispered the file number once for Loretta, then put the letter in a clear sleeve like you would a family photograph that finally learned its name. Noise came next. Talk radio took my face and held it up to 1,000 steering wheels. A host asked the question he had sharpened for noon, "Is this about money?" Commenters with names that looked algorithmic called me unstable, exploitive, confused. Sock puppet accounts pushed the line that I was harassing a respected security professional. I logged each smear in the notebook, not to remember, but to confirm my direction of travel. Naomi wrote, "We keep proof louder than noise," and pinned the message to the top of our thread. Proof is not a megaphone, but it is a metronome. It keeps time when the band plays dirty. Halbert announced a suspension pending review. The sentence marched with its knees high like a parade that couldn't admit it was a retreat. I didn't celebrate. The system was protecting itself, not me. If Ethan felt the floor tilt, he didn't show it. I pictured him in a spare apartment taking the longest route between the sink and the stove because a man cannot always walk through his own name quickly. We were two people on opposite sides of a glass the building called policy. I palmed the keychain and let the leather warm my skin. Opposing counsel called from the shade of the courthouse arcade. Increased donation, same terms. I said, same answer. He frowned in the pleasant way a waiter does when the soup goes back and the kitchen is his pride. Generosity without correction is a mirror that flatters and does not cleanse. They offered to do good quietly, to route funds to a cause near my heart, to keep all remarks dignified and off the record. I wanted their dignity in the microphone, their dignity on tape, their dignity where a young man a decade from now could point and say, "That's where the lie came undone." Word travels through churches the way water travels downhill. The pastor at a small black church in Charleston wrote Naomi to say their elders would testify about what it costs a home to keep a light on for 10 years. Detroit line mates texted me photos of old union pins and told me they'd stand on stone to say Andre was a certain kind of man. Our old family doctor, bent now and careful with stares, called to offer records and memory. Loretta carried stress like a brick in her apron, she said. Don't let them say it didn't weigh anything. I wrote each name under witnesses. A circle is not a wall, but it can hold. The body sent its own memo. I woke with my chest a fist. The clinic waited behind an antiseptic smell that remembered 100 Mondays. Paper gowns rasped, the blood pressure cuffs squeezed down in polite, implacable increments. Electrodes chilled the ribs. A young doctor with tired eyes listened to my heart like a mechanic who respects an engine older than his training. "You need rest," he said. "I need a record," I said. He sighed in the inclusive way, wrote a dosage, and asked me to turn my phone off at night. I left it on the lamp beside the bed instead, screen down, light on. If a small cone of yellow helped me sleep, call it medicine. Near dusk, I crossed the courthouse lot and saw him across 2 aisles of cars. He had the stance you learn when you don't want the world to measure you incorrectly. Square, unhurried, carrying his own weather. He didn't lift a hand. I didn't either. We looked, not at each other, but at the air between us where the public path ran. I memorized his silhouette the way a man memorizes the sound of a machine after a repair. Same note, harder to place. Naomi filtered the bile and surfed the facts. She built a page that held only the timeline, documents, and a photo of the porch light that had burned down to a brass socket. "Sleep with a lamp on if it steadies you," she said. "We aim the cameras later." I nodded into the phone and saved my breath. 2 days later, a courier put a brown envelope on Naomi's mat and left no name. The paper had that faint grit of many photocopies. Inside, memoranda with header blocks from a spread of private security firms in the 1990s. DMV acquisition, one read, followed by a table of states and rates. Anonymity stipend, read another, with a number that lined up with the payroll line we'd seen. Familial disclosure suppression, read a third, written as if a human bond were a hazard you tag in yellow foam. Payment schedules, authorized signatories. The phrase identity exit lane repeated like a lane marker flashing under a long-haul truck. We sat at Naomi's desk and spread the pages like maps. She ran a highlighter through names and dates. I traced one finger down a column until I found Michigan and then looked for a year that could hold my boy. We did not cheer, we exhaled. This wasn't a story, it was a design. The implication stood up on its own. This wasn't my son in my house alone. It was an industrial habit that taught men to become clean paper by subtracting kin. I thought of young versions of Ethan across 30 years, signing the clause with hands that had not yet learned trimmer. I thought of mothers who kept lights on until the filaments went bare. Precedent moved from word to work, not just declaratory identity and one correction, but discovery on the scheme, hearings with teeth, and a scholarship that would turn a lie's money into a tool a student could hold. I logged the new items in the notebook. Confirm, DNA, final, smear, ongoing. Ethan, suspended. Offer, refused. Witnesses, growing. Clinic, meds, lamp, envelope, DMV pipeline, stipend, suppression. The tide ticked against the marina pilings that night, counting for me while I slept in a room that hummed like a low-voltage prayer. If the cost was my breath, I would spend it. If the prize was a public name, I would carry it to the microphone and set it down where weather could not touch it. My attorney's conference room smelled like warm paper and toner, the air a little dry from a printer that had been asked to make truth reproducible. We snapped 2 blue binders shut, clause, and all DMV pipeline, and slid a third labeled payroll across the table until its tabs lined up with the others. The motion we filed that morning did 3 things in one breath. Move to void non-existence terms as against public policy, ask the court to compel production of contractor policies and DMV agreements, and stapled into the record the brown envelope memos that read like a manual for erasing people. The clerk stamped the packet. My notebook took the file number the way a beam takes a nail. We signed in a different room for a different work, the Loretta Rivers Scholarship. The CPA ran her finger down an incorporation form, the church elder read the mission aloud, and the retired line leader straightened the stack as if edges could bless intention. Governance, fixed. 1 chair from the church, 1 from the shop floor, 1 from the numbers. I initialed a line that routed any settlement dollars away from me and into the fund. Legal costs would be paid. The rest would teach a young hand to keep a machine from taking more than it should. I touched the leather keychain in my pocket and let the metal bite my finger, not a relic, an anchor. Witness prep happened where hymns usually do. We circled folding chairs in the church hall beneath song numbers that had not been changed since last Sunday. Naomi poured coffee that tasted like resolve and set a recorder between us with the red light off. We walked elders through the questions they might meet, dates, not feelings, observations, not theories. The retired line leader rehearsed the safety complaint Andre had made before he vanished. Our old family doctor opened a manila folder on Loretta's blood pressure curves and headaches, her tidy note that read, "Kept porch light on," the kind of domestic line that would be ignored if not spelled in ink. "Keep to what you saw," I said. Naomi nodded. "Proof before heat." Later, Naomi spread a foam board on her desk and pinned a 1-page timeline beside 3 artifacts: the Belle Isle photo, the flyer with rain-blurred eyes, and a color print of the lab's chain of custody seals on Andre's cap. She slid a payroll screenshot under the clips. Anonymity/hazard allowance. And a memo excerpt with a sentence that stung even when you read it twice. Familial disclosure suppression. 1 fact per breath, she said. I repeated the phrase like a torque spec. Resistance showed up in a suit that fit like certainty. Opposing counsel stamped trade secret across our discovery requests and cited security as if it were a curtain that could never be drawn. My attorney, patient and sharp, answered with public interest in the old law that says you cannot hide a wrong by calling it a tool. In chambers, the judge trimmed and then granted a narrow production window, limited categories, but real paper to touch. The order's edges felt clean when I ran a thumb along them. Sometimes justice begins as a width you can measure with a ruler. By midweek, a notice went up on the state site. Preliminary hearing. Private contractor identity practices. DMV data access. Public comment invited. The agenda was dry as toast, which is another way to say it might feed the right hunger. Naomi drafted written testimony requests and posted a tip line for families who recognized our shape in theirs. A pastor, a nurse, and a woman from Toledo who said her brother had gone paper quiet all wrote within an hour. In the middle of that motion and logistics, my attorney handed me a white envelope addressed in a clerk's neat hand. Inside, a single line on thin paper. Didn't want mother hurt. Was wrong to let you bear it alone. No signature, but the handwriting lived in a posture I knew. I let it warm in my palm until the ache sharpened and then dulled. It was a sentence for a kitchen table, not a microphone. I slid it into the notebook behind a tab marked Private and left it there. The other side floated a sweeter number with the same mute terms. Increased donation, no admission, no on-record naming, the emissary said in the corridor, as if generosity could substitute for correction. Names, I answered, then policy. He nodded like a man who has learned to admire a wall. On the courthouse steps, we ran a short, clean press line. Naomi handed the reporters a single page, timeline, artifacts, hearing date, scholarship contact, and we kept our mouths trimmed to match. I touched the keychain in my pocket and counted the 3 rungs I could stand on without wobbling. Identity, correction, policy, I said into the mics. Any funds flow only to the Loretta River Scholarship. If your family has lived under a similar clause, contact the tip line. Proof before heat. Calendars multiplied. The judge set a 30-day deadline on policy production and DMV agreements. The Oversight Committee posted a Monday morning for preliminary testimony. The Scholarship Board penciled in our first award meeting, and the CPA reminded us that good intentions need receipts. I wrote the dates in my notebook twice, once under court, once under community, so the 2 columns would learn to share the page. At night, the marina window held the dark the way a careful hand holds a bowl. I left the lamp on my desk, not vigil anymore, just light to work by, and checked our binders again, thumbed the tabs, read the motion spine sentence until it grooved into memory. My breath came even. The plan had trimmed itself down to what would bear weight. Void the clause that trains a man to say his blood is a hazard. Pull the paper trail on DM Vive exits into sunlight. Turn any money this case shakes free into a tool that keeps someone else whole. 2 voicemails waited when I shut the lid on the laptop. One from a state aide asking for the spelling of Loretta, so we can read it right into the record. One from Naomi. Press kit locked. Sleep if you can. I put the keychain on the table and watched it stop moving. The tide ticked against the pilings, patient as a clock. The work felt pointed. 3 lines on a board, 3 rungs on a ladder, and for the first time since the lab called with decimals, I believed the ladder would hold. The room felt trued, like a frame squared with a carpenter's patience. Varnished wood held the light, paper edges clicked as counsel arranged their stacks. I touched the leather keychain in my pocket and kept my breathing even. The judge's clerk adjusted the microphone. Its small pop sounded like a tap on metal. When the court called the case, I watched the man I'd searched for take the stand as if walking across a bridge he had long avoided naming. The oath landed simple and exact. The judge's gaze moved from counsel to him and back, then settled where it needed to. "Sir," she said, voice level as a bubble, "state your name for the record." A muscle worked in his jaw, the same one I'd scolded when he was a boy. He leaned into the mic so it would not have to strain. "My name is Andre Rivers." The syllables crossed the room and seated themselves where weather could not reach them. She asked the next necessary question, and he answered with the same clarity. Loretta Rivers was my mother. Jacob Rivers is my father. The earlier filing that had said no next of kin felt like a page being corrected in thick, permanent ink. My fingers eased inside my pocket as if a knot had backed off a quarter turn. The judge spoke her findings with the tidy authority of a worker who knows where every tool belongs. Declaratory judgment. Identity affirmed as Andre Rivers. Order, public correction of prior statements denying next of kin. Recommendation to the proper bodies. Employment terms demanding non-existence are inconsistent with public policy. Her gavel touched down once and did not need to argue for itself. Outside this room, other mechanisms clicked. Counsel for Halbert rose to memorialize an agreement. A multi-year pledge to the Loretta Rivers Scholarship, tuition support for students entering the safety trades, and coverage of my legal costs. I had insisted that money flow outward, not down into my pocket. There are times you close a valve so water can find the right field. My attorney repeated the condition: no personal enrichment, scholarship governance independent and named, and the clerk nodded while she typed. Policies don't change because a single bench recommends it, but recommendations turn into questions, and questions can shake a door. Before we adjourned, the Attorney General's office filed a notice. The State Oversight Committee posted a preliminary schedule to examine contractor identity practices and historic DMV data access. Some contracts would be placed on hold pending review. You could hear it outside the legal language if you knew what to listen for. The sound of an old hinge considering movement. When the session broke, the corridor filled with the soft riot of shoes on stone. He and I met halfway and stopped. I didn't reach for a hug, he didn't either. We shook hands because that is what you do when you understand that theater would lie on both of you. His grip lived in the space between apology and endurance. "All right," I said, which meant everything I could not say just then. He nodded once and went the way his counsel needed him to go. On the steps, a microphone line waited with foam windscreens that smelled faintly of dust. Naomi held back, letting the local crews stand first. I took my place at the tape and touched the keychain again, a visible habit only to me. I kept my words short because the day had spoken enough already. "I did not win," I said. "A name was restored. Identity, correction, policy, and a scholarship in my wife's name for the kind of work that keeps other people whole. I won't speak to private reconciliation. What needed saying was said in there. Questions came. I gave them the same answer. The record carries it." Naomi murmured, "That's the cut," and lowered her camera. Evening poured itself over the marina in the slow way water finds its level. Ropes creaked when the tide turned. Gulls went quiet. I walked the dock with the lettered judgment in my coat and Loretta's name in my mouth. I said it once to the bay and watched the purple light take it without argument. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like correct placement, like returning a socket to its home in the red tray and hearing the soft click that means order. The scholarship papers sat on my table that night, signatures drying under a lamp that threw a cone of yellow wide enough to reach the photo of 3 people squinting at Belle Isle. A retired line leader, a church elder, and an accountant who answers only to math had agreed to steward it. We had already received 2 emails from students who want to design safer machines, one from a girl whose father lost 3 fingers to a press brake. I thought of Andre's first day on the line, a boy wearing a man's jacket, and of the men who'd taught me to read a bearing by sound. Pain converted to a tool can hold. 2 mornings later, an unmarked envelope slid through my marina slot and clicked against the rubber mat. No return. Inside, a single metal key slumbered in a short fold of paper. It was Chevy Nova weight, stubborn and familiar. The shaft bore the nicks of a life that had opened more than one door. There was no note. There didn't need to be. I set it by our wedding photo on the shelf where sunlight finds dust and makes it earnest. A symbol is only heavy if you let it rest. I opened the notebook to the first page with fresh ink. Ethan Cole equals Andre, and turned slowly past weeks that had learned the language of stamps and exhibits. On the last page, I wrote a line I had been carrying for a long time. I wanted a door, not a lid. The court gave me one. Below it, I logged the final entry. Identity affirmed. Correction spoken. Policy in motion. Scholarship funded. Witnesses thanked. I closed the covers and set the book down flat. The room felt squared again. I pocketed the keychain and stood at the window until the light thinned, then reached to switch off the lamp. The dark that returned was ordinary and earned, and it did not take anyone's name with it. Saturday, the church hall wore its work clothes. Folding chairs made their tin song against the floor. A coffee urn breathed steam and little wheezes. Hymn numbers from last Sunday still waited on a board no one bothered to update. We laid out packets with the Loretta River Scholarship letterhead in a line that looked like a quiet procession, paper thick enough to hold ink like a promise, envelopes with a seam you had to press twice to be sure. I set my hand on the table to steady the pen and wrote the first name, Marcellus Tate, 19, Detroit, apprentice in industrial safety. His file said he'd rebuilt a busted shop saw guard with a part he printed at a public library. Be the one who makes machines fail safely, I told him when he came up with his mother, who carried pride in both hands like a casserole. He grinned the way a person grins when the future starts to recognize him. Second name, Aaliyah Green, 20, Charleston community college student, night custodian, days in a welding booth that smelled like thunder. Her essay said she watched her uncle count to 7 on his fingers and then pretend 8 and 10 didn't bother him. She signed, shook my hand, and said she wanted to write manuals people would actually read. I believed her because she said it like a wrench clamping down. When the small group clapped, it was the sound a room makes when it wishes it could be bigger. There is a way paper resists a pen when your hand is not sure. This paper didn't. I licked 2 envelopes without thinking and tasted the small tang of gum and afternoon light. The church elder we put on the scholarship board took attendance with a pencil that never seemed to dull. The retired line leader adjusted the stack until edges met like good joints. The CPA nodded once and wrote a number. The thing we had promised in court stood up and walked. I've come to believe there are 2 betrayals that live under the same roof. The first is a person's. My son's erasure of us, the sentence, no next of kin spoken and signed. The second is a design's. The clause that taught him to say it, the pipeline that traded family for payroll lines and peace of mind you could bill by the hour. The first cut deep because it knew my name. The second cut steady because it didn't care. You stop a person by talking. You stop a design by building a better one and making the blueprint public. I did not forgive a clause. I made it visible. Forgiveness, I learned late, is a permission you grant in private, not a remedy you demand in public. The remedy was always the same 3 steps I kept on my tongue like a creed. Identity, correction, policy, records over rumor, a door, not a lid, names said where lies were said. If a stranger remembers nothing else of me, let it be that I carried those words like a level and checked the world until a bubble settled in the right glass. Naomi screened the 17-minute cut in a room behind the sanctuary where the Sunday school posters held small ships with fat sails. The projector roared like a patient fan. On the screen, I watched myself walk, speak, sign. I watched Andre say my wife's name and mine. I watched the porch light's cone invade the dark and then give it back. The end card listed the oversight timeline and a tip line for families who recognized the shape of our story and theirs. When the lights came up, Naomi looked at me over the camera like she was citing a line. "Anything to add?" she asked. "Let the record stand," I said. There was a little clapping, then a good quiet. Afterward, I wrote 5 letters by hand to witnesses: the pastor, the retired line leader, the family doctor, Calvin, and the neighbor who kept our grass from looking abandoned when Loretta got tired. "Thank you for holding the rope," I wrote, each time in a different way. I addressed, stamped, and stacked them under a chipped mug so the envelopes would lie flat. In the corner of the desk, the notebook lay closed, not hidden, within reach the way tools you still love stay within reach after the project ends. Time has not healed me, it has measured me. It set a little level atop my days and showed where I lean. It took the hot edge off the cut and left me a seam to run my finger along, not to reopen it, but to remind myself the repair is intentional. The porch lamp that once stood for vigil now stands for ordinary light. I flip it on to read, to sign checks, to oil a hinge, then turn it off without fear I'm erasing anyone. The dark that returns belongs to night and birds and water, not to loss. Back at the marina, the ropes creaked with their usual courtesy. I carried the leather keychain in my pocket and touched it when I passed the boats that had learned all the ways tide speaks to wood. The Chevy Nova key sat on the shelf beside our wedding photo where dust glowed like honest work under late sun. I don't worship it. I let it be heavy near the glass where Loretta's smile looks like a decision kept. Some nights I press my thumb to the key's teeth and feel 5 small promises and 5 small risks. Then I set it down again. On a Sunday evening that felt wider than its hours, I watched the harbor purple and thought of families who would write their own petitions in rooms that smell like varnish and paper. The oversight calendars will turn, the memos will cough up dates and payments, the committees will ask their dry questions. A year from now, a contractor will cross a clause out with a pen and pretend it was always obvious. 2 years from now, a student with a scholarship named for my wife will install a guard on a machine and save a hand that will pat a child's shoulder and set a tool down clean. That will be the gospel I can stand to hear. Before bed, I checked the door, the stove, the window latches, habits that keep a life from rattling loose. I touched the photo glass and felt its cool, the way proof feels when it has nowhere left to run. I picked up the notebook, opened to the last entry. Identity affirmed. Correction spoken. Policy in motion. Scholarship funded. And read it once, not to believe it, but to let it be ordinary. I closed the covers and left it on the desk where my hand could find it without reaching. Then I went to the lamp. I did not listen for footsteps on a gravel road. I did not negotiate with the dark. I put my fingers on the switch and turned the light off. The room held its shape. The window held a simple night. No vigil necessary. If a road back exists for any of us, it begins with a name said right and continues with the work to make that name safe to carry. I lay down beside my years and slept, not empty, not full, just placed where I belonged. In the end, what endures isn't triumph, but placement, a name set back on its rightful shelf, truth spoken where silence once grew fat. We learn that time doesn't heal so much as measure. It lays a level across our days and shows where they lean. Repair begins when records outlast rumor, when the door opens and fresh air reaches the room. There are 2 betrayals to survive: the private cut and the public design. We can forgive the first in private. We must reform the second in daylight. What matters afterward is simple. Keep the lights for work, not vigil. Turn pain into precedent. Make safety and dignity the ordinary setting, not the exception. If this story met you somewhere tender, carry forward its ladder, identity, correction, policy, and offer it to someone who needs a way up. Thank you for spending your time here. Tell us what stayed with you in the comments and where you're watching from. It helps this community learn from many roads. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter of resilience and truth.